The Ugly Duckling by Hans Christian Andersen. It was so beautiful in the country. It was the summertime. The wheat fields were golden, the oats were green, and the hay stood in great stacks in the green meadows. The stork paraded about them on his long red legs, chattering away in Egyptian, the language he had learned from his lady mother. All around the meadows and cornfields grew thick woods, and in the midst of the forest was a deep lake. Yes, it was beautiful. It was delightful in the country. In a sunny spot stood a pleasant old farmhouse, circled all about with deep canals, and from the walls down to the water's edge grew great burdocks, so high that under the tallest of them a little child might stand upright. The spot was as wild as if it had been in the very center of the thick wood. In this snug retreat sat a duck upon her nest, watching for her young brood to hatch. But the pleasure she had felt at first was almost gone. She had begun to think it a wearisome task, for the little ones were so long coming out of their shells, and she seldom had visitors. The other ducks liked much better to swim about in the canals than to climb the slippery banks and sit under the burdock leaves to have a gossip with her. It was a long time to stay so much by herself. At length, however, one shell cracked, and soon another, and from each came a living creature that lifted its head and cried, "Peep, peep!" "Quack, quack!" said the mother, and they all tried to say it too, as well as they could, while they looked all about them on every side, at the tall green leaves. Their mother allowed them to look about as much as they liked, because green is good for the eyes. "What a great world it is, to be sure," said the little ones, when they found how much more room they had than when they were in the eggshell. "Is this all the world, do you imagine?" said the mother. "Wait till you have seen the garden. Far beyond that, it stretches down to the pastor's field, though I have never ventured to such a distance. Are you all out?" she continued, rising to look. "No, not all. The largest egg lies there yet, I declare. I wonder how long this business is to last. I'm really beginning to be tired of it." But for all that, she sat down again. "Well, and how are you today?" quacked an old duck who came to pay her a visit. "There's one egg that takes a deal of hatching. The shell is hard and will not break," said the fond mother, who sat still upon her nest. "But just look at the others. Have I not a pretty family? Are they not the prettiest little ducklings you ever saw? They are the image of their father, the good-for-naught. He never comes to see me." "Let me see the egg that will not break," said the old duck. "I've no doubt it's a guinea fowl's egg. The same thing happened to me once, and a deal of trouble it gave me, for the young ones are afraid of the water." I quacked and clucked, but all to no purpose. "Let me take a look at it. Yes, I am right. It's a guinea fowl, upon my word. So take my advice and leave it where it is. Come to the water and teach the other children to swim." "I think I will sit a little while longer," said the mother. "I have sat so long, a day or two more won't matter." "Very well, please yourself," said the old duck, rising, and she went away. At last the great egg broke, and the latest bird cried, "Peep, peep," as he crept forth from the shell. How big and ugly he was! The mother duck stared at him and did not know what to think. "Really," she said, "this is an enormous duckling, and it is not at all like any of the others. I wonder if he will turn out to be a guinea fowl. Well, we shall see when we get to the water, for into the water he must go, even if I have to push him in myself." On the next day, the weather was delightful. The sun shone brightly on the green burdock leaves, and the mother duck took her whole family down to the water and jumped in with a splash. "Quack, quack!" cried she, and one after another the little ducklings jumped in. The water closed over their heads, but they came up again in an instant and swam about quite prettily, with their legs paddling under them as easily as possible. Their legs went of their own accord, and the ugly greycoat was also in the water, swimming with them. "Oh," said the mother, "that is not a guinea fowl. See how well he uses his legs, and how erect he holds himself. He is my own child, and he is not so very ugly after all, if you look at him properly. Quack, quack! Come with me now. I will take you into grand society and introduce you to the farmyard. But you must keep close to me, or you may be trodden upon. And, above all, beware of the cat." When they reached the farmyard, there was a wretched riot going on. 2 families were fighting for an eel's head, which, after all, was carried off by the cat. "See, children, that is the way of the world," said the mother duck, wetting her beak, for she would have liked the eel's head herself. "Come now, use your legs, and let me see how well you can behave. You must bow your heads prettily to that old duck yonder. She is the highest born of them all and has Spanish blood. Therefore she is well off. Don't you see she has a red rag tied to her leg, which is something very grand and a great honor for a duck? It shows that everyone is anxious not to lose her, and that she is to be noticed by both man and beast. Come now, don't turn in your toes. A well-bred duckling spreads his feet wide apart, just like his father and mother. In this way. Now bend your necks and say, quack. The ducklings did as they were bade, but the other ducks stared and said, Look, here comes another brood, as if there weren't enough of us already. And bless me! What a queer-looking object one of them is. We don't want him here. And then one flew out and bit him in the neck. Let him alone, said the mother. He is not doing any harm. Yes, but he is so big and ugly. He's a perfect fright, said the spiteful duck. And therefore he must be turned out. A little biting will do him good. The others are very pretty children, said the old duck with the rag on her leg. All but that one. I wish his mother could smooth him up a bit. He is really ill-favored. That is impossible, your grace, replied the mother. He is not pretty, but he has a very good disposition, and swims as well as the others, or even better. I think he will grow up pretty, and perhaps be smaller. He has remained too long in the egg, and therefore his figure is not properly formed. And then she stroked his neck and smoothed the feathers, saying, It's a drake, and therefore not of so much consequence. I think he will grow up strong and able to take care of himself. The other ducklings are graceful enough, said the old duck. Now make yourself at home, and if you find an eel's head, you can bring it to me. And so they made themselves comfortable. But the poor duckling who had crept out of his shell last of all and looked so ugly was bitten and pushed and made fun of, not only by the ducks but by all the poultry. He is too big, they all said, and the turkey cock, who had been born into the world with spurs and fancied himself really an emperor, puffed himself out like a vessel in full sail and flew at the duckling. He became quite red in the head with passion, so that the poor little thing did not know where to go, and was quite miserable because he was so ugly as to be laughed at by the whole farmyard. So it went on from day to day. It got worse and worse. The poor duckling was driven about by everyone. Even his brothers and sisters were unkind to him and would say, Ah, you ugly creature! I wish the cat would get you." And his mother had been heard to say she wished he had never been born. The ducks pecked him, the chickens beat him, and the girl who fed the poultry pushed him with her feet. So at last he ran away, frightening the little birds in the hedge as he flew over the palings. "They are afraid because I am so ugly," he said. So he flew still farther, until he came out on a large moor inhabited by wild ducks. Here he remained the whole night, feeling very sorrowful. In the morning, when the wild ducks rose in the air, they stared at their new comrade. "What sort of duck are you?" they all said, coming round him. He bowed to them and was as polite as he could be, but he did not reply to their question. "You are exceedingly ugly," said the wild ducks, "but that will not matter if you do not want to marry one of our family." Poor thing! He had no thoughts of marriage. All he wanted was permission to lie among the rushes and drink some of the water on the moor. After he had been on the moor 2 days, there came 2 wild geese, or rather goslings, for they had not been out of the egg long, which accounts for their impertinence. "Listen, friend," said one of them to the duckling. "You are so ugly that we like you very well. Will you go with us and become a bird of passage? Not far from here is another moor, in which there are some wild geese, all of them unmarried. It is a chance for you to get a wife. You may make your fortune, ugly as you are." Bang, bang, sounded in the air, and the 2 wild geese fell dead among the rushes, and the water was tinged with blood. Bang, bang, echoed far and wide in the distance, and whole flocks of wild geese rose up from the rushes. The sound continued from every direction, for the sportsmen surrounded the moor, and some were even seated on branches of trees, overlooking the rushes. The blue smoke from the guns rose like clouds over the dark trees. And, as it floated away across the water, a number of sporting dogs bounded in among the rushes, which bent beneath them wherever they went. How they terrified the poor duckling! He turned away his head to hide it under his wing, and at the same moment, a large, terrible dog passed quite near him. His jaws were open, his tongue hung from his mouth, and his eyes glared fearfully. He thrust his nose close to the duckling, showing his sharp teeth, and then, splash, splash, he went into the water, without touching him. "Oh," sighed the duckling, "how thankful I am for being so ugly. Even a dog will not bite me." And so he lay quite still, while the shot rattled through the rushes, and gun after gun was fired over him. It was late in the day before all became quiet, but even then, the poor young thing did not dare to move. He waited quietly for several hours, and then, after looking carefully around him, hastened away from the moor as fast as he could. He ran over field and meadow till a storm arose, and he could hardly struggle against it. Towards evening, he reached a poor little cottage that seemed ready to fall, and only seemed to remain standing because it could not decide on which side to fall first. The storm continued so violent that the duckling could go no farther. He sat down by the cottage, and then he noticed that the door was not quite closed, in consequence of one of the hinges having given way. There was, therefore, a narrow opening near the bottom large enough for him to slip through, which he did very quietly, and got a shelter for the night. Here, in this cottage, lived a woman, a cat, and a hen. The cat, whom his mistress called "my little son," was a great favorite. He could raise his back and purr, and could even throw out sparks from his fur if it were stroked the wrong way. The hen had very short legs, so she was called Chickie Shortlegs. She laid good eggs, and her mistress loved her as if she had been her own child. In the morning, the strange visitor was discovered. The cat began to purr and the hen to cluck. "What is that noise about?" said the old woman, looking around the room. But her sight was not very good. Therefore, when she saw the duckling, she thought it must be a fat duck that had strayed from home. "Oh, what a prize!" she exclaimed. "I hope it is not a drake, for then I shall have some duck's eggs. I must wait and see." So the duckling was allowed to remain on trial for 3 weeks, but there were no eggs. Now the cat was the master of the house, and the hen was the mistress, and they always said, "We and the world," for they believed themselves to be half the world, and by far the better half, too. The duckling thought that others might hold a different opinion on the subject, but the hen would not listen to such doubts. "Can you lay eggs?" she asked. "No." "Then have the goodness to cease talking." "Can you raise your back, or purr, or throw out sparks?" said the cat. "No." "Then you have no right to express an opinion when sensible people are speaking." So the duckling sat in a corner, feeling very low-spirited. But when the sunshine and the fresh air came into the room through the open door, he began to feel such a great longing for a swim that he could not help speaking of it. "What an absurd idea," said the hen. "You have nothing else to do, therefore you have foolish fancies. If you could purr or lay eggs, they would pass away." "But it is so delightful to swim about on the water," said the duckling, "and so refreshing to feel it close over your head while you dive down to the bottom." "Delightful indeed! It must be a queer sort of pleasure," said the hen. "Why, you must be crazy. Ask the cat. He is the cleverest animal I know. Ask him how he would like to swim about on the water, or to dive under it, for I will not speak of my own opinion. Ask our mistress, the old woman. There is no one in the world more clever than she is. Do you think she would relish swimming and letting the water close over her head?" "I see you don't understand me," said the duckling. "We don't understand you? Who can understand you, I wonder? Do you consider yourself more clever than the cat or the old woman? I will say nothing of myself. Don't imagine such nonsense, child. And thank your good fortune that you have been so well received here. Are you not in a warm room and in society from which you may learn something? But you are a chatterer, and your company is not very agreeable. Believe me, I speak only for your good. I may tell you unpleasant truths, but that is a proof of my friendship. I advise you, therefore, to lay eggs and learn to purr as quickly as possible." "I believe I must go out into the world again," said the duckling. "Yes, do," said the hen. So the duckling left the cottage and soon found water on which it could swim and dive. But he was avoided by all the other animals because of his ugly appearance. Autumn came, and the leaves in the forest turned to orange and gold. Then, as winter approached, the wind caught them as they fell and whirled them into the cold air. The clouds, heavy with hail and snowflakes, hung low in the sky, and the raven stood among the reeds, crying, "Croak, croak!" It made one shiver with cold to look at him. All this was very sad for the poor little duckling. One evening, just as the sun was setting amid radiant clouds, there came a large flock of beautiful birds out of the bushes. The duckling had never seen anything like them before. They were swans, and they curved their graceful necks, while their soft plumage shone with dazzling whiteness. They uttered a singular cry as they spread their glorious wings and flew away from those cold regions to warmer countries across the sea. They mounted higher and higher in the air, and the ugly little duckling had a strange sensation as he watched them. He whirled himself in the water like a wheel, stretched out his neck towards them, and uttered a cry so strange that it frightened even himself. How could he ever forget those beautiful, happy birds? And when at last they were out of his sight, he dived under the water and rose again, almost beside himself with excitement. He knew not the names of these birds nor where they had flown, but he felt towards them as he had never felt towards any other bird in the world. He was not envious of these beautiful creatures. It never occurred to him to wish to be as lovely as they. Poor, ugly creature, how gladly he would have lived even with the ducks, had they only treated him kindly and given him encouragement. The winter grew colder and colder. He was obliged to swim about on the water to keep it from freezing. But every night, the space on which he swam became smaller and smaller. At length it froze so hard that the ice in the water crackled as he moved, and the duckling had to paddle with his legs as well as he could to keep the space from closing up. He became exhausted at last and lay still and helpless, frozen fast in the ice. Early in the morning, a peasant who was passing by saw what had happened. He broke the ice in pieces with his wooden shoe and carried the duckling home to his wife. The warmth revived the poor little creature, but when the children wanted to play with him, the duckling thought they would do him some harm, so he started up in terror, fluttering into the milk pan, and splashed the milk about the room. Then the woman clapped her hands, which frightened him still even more. He flew first into the butter cask, then into the meal tub and out again. What a condition he was in! The woman screamed and struck at him with the tongs. The children laughed and screamed and tumbled over each other in their efforts to catch him, but luckily he escaped. The door stood open. The poor creature could just manage to slip out among the bushes and lie down, quite exhausted in the newly fallen snow. It would be very sad were I to relate all the misery and privations which the poor little duckling endured during that hard winter. But when it had passed, he found himself lying one morning in a moor amongst the rushes. He felt the warm sun shining and heard the larks singing and saw that all around was beautiful spring. Then the young bird felt that his wings were strong as he flapped them against his sides and rose high into the air. They bore him onwards until, before he well knew how it had happened, he found himself in a large garden. The apple trees were in full blossom, and the fragrant elders bent their long green branches down to the stream, which wound round a smooth lawn. Everything looked beautiful in the freshness of early spring. From a thicket close by came 3 beautiful white swans, rustling their feathers and swimming lightly over the smooth water. The duckling saw these lovely birds and felt more strangely unhappy than ever. "I will fly to these royal birds," he exclaimed, "and they will kill me because, ugly as I am, I dare to approach them. But it does not matter. Better be killed by them than pecked by the ducks, beaten by the hens, pushed about by the maiden who feeds the poultry, or starved with hunger in the winter." Then he flew to the water and swam towards the beautiful swans. The moment they spied the stranger, they rushed to meet him with outstretched wings. "Kill me," said the poor bird, and he bent his head down to the surface of the water and awaited death. But what did he see in the clear stream below? His own image, no longer a dark gray bird, ugly and disagreeable to look at, but a graceful and beautiful swan. To be born in a duck's nest in a farmyard is of no consequence to a bird if it is hatched from a swan's egg. He now felt glad at having suffered sorrow and trouble, because it enabled him to enjoy so much better all the pleasure and happiness around him. For the great swan swam round the newcomer, and stroked his neck with their beaks as a welcome. Into the garden presently came some little children and threw bread and cake into the water. "See," cried the youngest, "there is a new one." And the rest were delighted and ran to their father and mother, dancing and clapping their hands and shouting joyously, "There is another swan come! A new one has arrived!" Then they threw more bread and cake into the water and said, "The new one is the most beautiful of all. He is so young and pretty." And the old swans bowed their heads before him. Then he felt quite ashamed and hid his head under his wing, for he did not know what to do. He was so happy, yet he was not at all proud. He had been persecuted and despised for his ugliness, and now he heard them say he was the most beautiful of all the birds. Even the elder tree bent down its boughs into the water before him, and the sun shone warm and bright. Then he rustled his feathers, curved his slender neck, and cried joyfully from the depths of his heart, "I never dreamed of such happiness as this while I was the despised ugly duckling." The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank, underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there, and he was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail were good little bunnies, went down to the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net, and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. He rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each one. Presently, Peter sneezed. "Achoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. He tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all round. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go, along a straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice, soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The Tortoise and the Hare by Aesop. A hare was making fun of the tortoise one day for being so slow. "Do you ever get anywhere?" he asked with a mocking laugh. "Yes," replied the tortoise, "and I get there sooner than you think. I'll run you a race and prove it." The hare was much amused at the idea of running a race with a tortoise, but for the fun of the thing he agreed. So the fox, who had consented to act as judge, marked the distance and started the runners off. The hare was soon far out of sight, and to make the tortoise feel very deeply how ridiculous it was for him to try a race with a hare, he lay down beside the course to take a nap until the tortoise should catch up. The tortoise, meanwhile, kept going slowly but steadily, and after a time, passed the place where the hare was sleeping. But the hare slept on very peacefully, and when at last he did wake up, the tortoise was near the goal. The hare now ran his swiftest, but he could not overtake the tortoise in time. The Boy Who Cried Wolf by Aesop. A shepherd boy tended his master's sheep near a dark forest not far from the village. Soon he found life in the pasture very dull. All he could do to amuse himself was to talk to his dog or play on his shepherd's pipe. One day, as he sat watching the sheep and the quiet forest, and thinking what he would do should he see a wolf, he thought of a plan to amuse himself. His master had told him to call for help should a wolf attack the flock, and the villagers would drive it away. So, now, though he had not seen anything that even looked like a wolf, he ran toward the village shouting at the top of his voice, "Wolf! Wolf!" As he expected, the villagers who heard the cry dropped their work and ran in great excitement to the pasture. But when they got there, they found the boy doubled up with laughter at the trick he had played on them. A few days later, the shepherd boy again shouted, "Wolf! Wolf!" Again, the villagers ran to help him, only to be laughed at again. Then, one evening, as the sun was setting behind the forest and the shadows were creeping out over the pasture, a wolf really did spring from the underbrush and fall upon the sheep. In terror, the boy ran toward the village shouting, "Wolf! Wolf!" But though the villagers heard the cry, they did not run to help him as they had before. "He cannot fool us again," they said. The wolf ate a great many of the boy's sheep and then slipped away into the forest. The Elves and the Shoemaker by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a shoemaker who worked very hard and was very honest. But still he could not earn enough to live upon, and at last all he had in the world was gone, save just leather enough to make one pair of shoes. Then he cut his leather out, all ready to make up the next day, meaning to rise early in the morning to his work. His conscience was clear and his heart light amidst all his troubles, so he went peacefully to bed, left all his cares to heaven, and soon fell asleep. In the morning, after he had said his prayers, he sat himself down to his work, when, to his great wonder, there stood the shoes already made upon the table. The good man knew not what to say or think at such an odd thing happening. He looked at the workmanship. There was not one false stitch in the whole job. All was so neat and true that it was quite a masterpiece. The same day a customer came in, and the shoes suited him so well that he willingly paid a price higher than usual for them. And the poor shoemaker, with the money, bought leather enough to make 2 pairs more. In the evening he cut out the work and went to bed early, that he might get up and begin early again the next day. But he was saved all the trouble, for when he got up in the morning, the work was done ready to his hand. Soon in came buyers, who paid him handsomely for his goods, so that he bought leather enough for 4 pair more. He cut out the work again overnight and found it done in the morning, as before. And so it went on for some time. What was got ready in the evening was always done by daybreak, and the good man soon became thriving and well off again. One evening, about Christmas time, as he and his wife were sitting over the fire chatting together, he said to her, "I should like to sit up and watch tonight, that we may see who it is that comes and does my work for me." The wife liked the thought, so they left a light burning and hid themselves in a corner of the room, behind a curtain that was hung up there, and watched what would happen. As soon as it was midnight, there came in 2 little naked dwarfs, and they sat themselves upon the shoemaker's bench, took up all the work that was cut out, and began to ply with their little fingers, stitching and rapping and tapping away at such a rate that the shoemaker was all wonder and could not take his eyes off them. And on they went till the job was quite done, and the shoes stood ready for use upon the table. This was long before daybreak, and then they bustled away as quick as lightning. The next day the wife said to the shoemaker, "These little wights have made us rich, and we ought to be thankful to them, and do them a good turn if we can. I am quite sorry to see them run about as they do, and indeed it is not very decent, for they have nothing upon their backs to keep off the cold. I'll tell you what, I will make each of them a shirt, and a coat and a waistcoat, and a pair of pantaloons into the bargain. And do you make them each a little pair of shoes." The thought pleased the good cobbler very much, and one evening, when all the things were ready, they laid them on the table, instead of the work that they used to cut out, and then went and hid themselves, to watch what the little elves would do. About midnight they came in, dancing and skipping, hopped round the room, and then went to sit down to their work as usual. But when they saw the clothes lying for them, they laughed and chuckled, and seemed mightily delighted. Then they dressed themselves in the twinkling of an eye, and danced and capered and sprang about, as merry as could be, till at last they danced out at the door and away over the green. The good couple saw them no more, but everything went well with them from that time forward, as long as they lived. The Pied Piper of Hamelin by Robert Browning. 1. Hamelin Towns in Brunswick, by famous Hanover City. The river Weser, deep and wide, washes its wall on the southern side. A pleasanter spot you never spied. But when begins my ditty, almost 500 years ago? To see the townsfolk suffer so, from vermin was a pity. 2. Rats, they fought the dogs and killed the cats, and bit the babies in the cradles, and ate the cheeses out of the vats, and licked the soup from the cook's own ladles, split open the kegs of salted sprats, made nests inside men's Sunday hats, and even spoiled the women's chats by drowning their speaking with shrieking and squeaking in 50 different sharps and flats. 3. At last the people in a body to the town hall came flocking. "'Tis clear," cried they, "our mayor's a naughty. And as for our corporation, shocking, to think we buy gowns lined with ermine, for dolts that can't or won't determine. What's best to rid us of our vermin? You hope, because you're old and obese, to find in the furry civic robe ease. Rouse up, sirs, give your brains a racking, to find the remedy we're lacking. Or, sure as fate, we'll send you packing." At this the mayor and corporation quaked with a mighty consternation. 4. An hour they sate in council. At length the mayor broke silence. "For a guilder I'd my ermine gown sell. I wish I were a mile hence. It's easy to bid one rack one's brain. I'm sure my poor head aches again. I've scratched it so, and all in vain. Oh, for a trap, a trap, a trap." Just as he said this, what should hap at the chamber door but a gentle tap? "Bless us," cried the mayor, "what's that?" With the corporation as he sat, looking little though wondrous fat, nor brighter was his eye, nor moister, than a too long opened oyster, save when at noon his paunch grew mutinous, for a plate of turtle green and glutinous. Only a scraping of shoes on the mat? Anything like the sound of a rat makes my heart go pit-a-pat. 5. "Come in," the mayor cried, looking bigger, and in did come the strangest figure. His queer long coat from heel to head was half of yellow and half of red, and he himself was tall and thin, with sharp blue eyes, each like a pin, and light, loose hair, yet swarthy skin, no tuft on cheek nor beard on chin, but lips where smile went out and in. There was no guessing his kith and kin, and nobody could enough admire the tall man in his quaint attire. Quoth one, "It's as my great-grandsire," starting up at the trump of doom's tone, had walked this way from his painted tombstone. 6. He advanced to the council table, and, "Please your honors," said he, "I'm able, by means of a secret charm to draw all creatures living beneath the sun, that creep or swim or fly or run after me so as you never saw, and I chiefly use my charm on creatures that do people harm. The mole and toad and newt and viper, and people call me the Pied Piper." And here they noticed round his neck a scarf of red and yellow stripe, to match with his coat of the self-same check, and at the scarf's end hung a pipe. And his fingers they noticed were ever straying, as if impatient to be playing, upon his pipe as low it dangled, over his vesture so old-fangled. "Yet," said he, "poor piper as I am, in Tartary I freed the cham. Last June, from his huge swarms of gnats, I eased in Asia the nizam of a monstrous brood of vampire bats. And as for what your brain bewilders, if I can rid your town of rats, will you give me 1,000 guilders?" "One? 50,000!" was the exclamation of the astonished mayor and corporation. 7. Into the street the piper stepped, smiling first a little smile, as if he knew what magic slept in his quiet pipe the while. Then, like a musical adept, to blow the pipe his lips he wrinkled, and green and blue his sharp eyes twinkled, like a candle flame where salt is sprinkled, and ere 3 shrill notes the pipe uttered, you heard as if an army muttered. And the muttering grew to a grumbling, and the grumbling grew to a mighty rumbling. And out of the houses the rats came tumbling, great rats, small rats, lean rats, brawny rats, brown rats, black rats, gray rats, tawny rats, grave old plotters, gay young friskers, fathers, mothers, uncles, cousins, cocking tails and pricking whiskers, families by tens and dozens, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, followed the piper for their lives. From street to street he piped advancing, and step for step they followed dancing, until they came to the river Wasir, wherein all plunged and perished, save one who, stout as Julius Caesar, swam across and lived to carry, as he the manuscript he cherished, to Ratland home his commentary, which was, at the first shrill notes of the pipe, I heard a sound as of scraping tripe, and putting apples wondrous ripe into a cider press's gripe, and a moving away of pickle tub boards, and a leaving a jar of conserve cupboards, and a drawing the corks of train oil flasks, and a breaking the hoops of butter casks. And if it seemed as if a voice, sweeter far than by harp or by psaltery is breathed, called out, "O rats, rejoice! The world is grown to one vast dry psaltery. So munch on, crunch on, take your nunch on. Breakfast, supper, dinner, luncheon, and just as a bulky sugar punchin'. Already staved like a great sun shone, glorious scarce an inch before me, just as methought it said, 'Come bore me!' I found the Wazir rolling o'er me." 8. You should have heard the Hamlin people ringing the bells till they rocked the steeple. "Go," cried the mayor, "and get long poles. Poke out the nests and block up the holes. Consult with carpenters and builders, and leave in our town not even a trace of the rats," when suddenly up the face of the piper perked in the marketplace, with a "First, if you please, my 1,000 guilders." 9. 1,000 guilders! The mayor looked blue. So did the corporation, too. For council dinners made rare havoc, with claret, moselle, vin de grave, hock. And half the money would replenish their cellar's biggest butt with Rhenish. To pay this sum to a wandering fellow with a gypsy coat of red and yellow. Beside, quoth the mayor with a knowing wink, our business was done at the river's brink. We saw with our eyes the vermin sink. And what's dead can't come to life, I think. So, friend, we're not the folks to shrink from the duty of giving you something to drink and a matter of money to put in your poke. But as for the guilders, what we spoke of them, as you very well know, was in joke. Besides, our losses have made us thrifty. 1,000 guilders, come, take 50. 10. The piper's face fell, and he cried, No trifling! I can't wait, besides! I've promised to visit by dinner time, Baghdad, and accept the prime of the head cook's pottage, all he's rich in, for having left in the caliph's kitchen. Of a nest of scorpions, no survivor. With him I proved no bargain driver. With you, don't think I'll bait a stiver. And folks who put me in a passion may find me pipe after another fashion. 11. How? Cried the mayor. D'ye think I brook, being worse treated than a cook? Insulted by a lazy ribald, with idle pipe and vesture piebald. You threaten us, fellow? Do your worst. Blow your pipe there till you burst. 12. Once more he stepped into the street, and to his lips again laid his long pipe of smooth straight cane. And ere he blew 3 notes, there was a rustling that seemed like a bustling of merry crowds justling at pitching and hustling. Small feet were pattering, wooden shoes clattering, little hands clapping and little tongues chattering. And, like fowls in a farmyard when barley is scattering, out came the children running, all the little boys and girls, with rosy cheeks and flaxen curls, and sparkling eyes and teeth like pearls, tripping and skipping, ran merrily after the wonderful music with shouting and laughter. 13. The mayor was dumb, and the council stood, as if they were changed into blocks of wood, unable to move a step or cry to the children merrily skipping by. Could only follow with the eye that joyous crowd at the piper's back. But how the mayor was on the rack, and the wretched council's bosoms beat, as the piper turned from the high street to where the Wasir rolled its waters, right in the way of their sons and daughters. However, he turned from south to west, and to Kopelberg Hill his steps addressed. And after him the children pressed. Great was the joy in every breast. He never can cross that mighty top. He's forced to let the piping drop, and we shall see our children stop. When, lo, as they reached the mountainside, a wondrous portal opened wide, as if a cavern was suddenly hollowed, and the piper advanced and the children followed. And when all were in to the very last, the door in the mountainside shut fast. Did I say all? No, one was lame, and could not dance the whole of the way, and in after years, if you would blame his sadness, he was used to say, It's dull in our own town since my playmates left. I can't forget that I am bereft of all the pleasant sights they see, which the piper also promised me. For he led us, he said, to a joyous land, joining the town and just at hand, where waters gushed and fruit trees grew, and flowers put forth a fairer hue, and everything was strange and new. The sparrows were brighter than peacocks here, and their dogs outran our fallow deer. And honeybees had lost their stings, and horses were born with eagle's wings. And just as I became assured, my lame foot would be speedily cured, the music stopped and I stood still, and found myself outside the hill, left alone against my will, to go now limping as before, and never hear of that country more. 14. Alas, alas for Hamlin! There came into many a burgher's pate a text which says that heaven's gate opes to the rich at as easy rate as the needle's eye takes a camel in. The mayor sent east, west, north, and south to offer the piper by word of mouth. Wherever it was men's lot to find him, silver and gold to his heart's content, if he'd only return the way he went and bring the children behind him. But when they saw 'twas a lost endeavor, and piper and dancers were gone forever, they made a decree that lawyers never should think their records dated duly, if, after the day of the month and year, these words did not as well appear. And so long after what happened here, on the 22nd of July, 1376, and the better in memory to fix the place of the children's last retreat, they called it the Pied Piper's Street, where anyone playing on pipe or tabor was sure for the future to lose his labor. Nor suffered they hostelry or tavern to shock with mirth a street so solemn, but opposite the place of the cavern, they wrote the story on a column, and on the great church window painted the same to make the world acquainted, how their children were stolen away, and there it stands to this very day. And I must not omit to say that in Transylvania there's a tribe of alien people that ascribe the outlandish ways and dress on which their neighbors lay such stress to their fathers and mothers having risen out of some subterraneous prison into which they were trepanned long time ago in a mighty band out of Hamlin town in Brunswick land, but how or why they don't understand. 15. So, Willie, let me and you be wipers of scores out with all men, especially pipers. And whether they pipe us free from rats or from mice, if we've promised them aught, let us keep our promise. The end. If you enjoyed this audiobook in any way, an honest review is always appreciated. This has been Bedtime Meditation Stories for Kids. Written by Children's Story Group. Narrated by Children's Story Group. Copyright year 2020 by Children's Story Group. Production copyright year 2020 by Children's Story Group. The most beloved bedtime stories for kids. 7 Aesop's Fables for Children. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Little Red Riding Hood. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The Three Little Pigs. And many more. Written by Children's Story Group. Narrated by Children's Story Group. Goldilocks and the Three Bears by Robert Southey. Once upon a time, there were 3 bears who lived together in a house of their own in a wood. One of them was a little wee bear, and one was a middle-sized bear, and the other was a great big bear. They had each a bowl for their porridge, a little bowl for the little wee bear, and a middle-sized bowl for the middle-sized bear, and a great bowl for the great big bear. And they had each a chair to sit in, a little chair for the little wee bear, and a middle-sized chair for the middle-sized bear, and a great chair for the great big bear. And they each had a bed to sleep in, a little bed for the little wee bear, and a middle-sized bed for the middle-sized bear, and a great bed for the great big bear. One day, after they had made the porridge for their breakfast and poured it into their porridge bowls, they walked out into the wood while the porridge was cooling, that they might not burn their mouths by beginning too soon, for they were polite, well-brought-up bears. And while they were away, a little girl called Goldilocks, who lived at the other side of the wood and had been sent on an errand by her mother, passed by the house and looked in at the window. And then she peeped in at the keyhole, for she was not at all a well-brought-up little girl. Then, seeing nobody in the house, she lifted the latch. The door was not fastened, because the bears, who were good bears, who did nobody any harm and never suspected that anybody would harm them. So Goldilocks opened the door and went in, and well pleased was she when she saw the porridge on the table. If she had been a well-brought-up little girl, she would have waited till the bears came home, and then, perhaps, they would have asked her to breakfast, for they were good bears. A little rough or so, as the manner of bears is, but for all that very good-natured and hospitable. But she was an impudent, rude little girl, and so she set about helping herself. First, she tasted the porridge of the great big bear, and that was too hot for her. Next, she tasted the porridge of the middle-sized bear, but that was too cold for her. And then she went to the porridge of the little wee bear and tasted it, and that was neither too hot nor too cold, but just right. And she liked it so well that she ate it all up, every bit. Then Goldilocks, who was tired, for she had been catching butterflies instead of running on her errand, sat down in the chair of the great big bear, but that was too hard for her. And then she sat down in the chair of the middle-sized bear, but that was too soft for her. But when she sat down in the chair of the little wee bear, that was neither too hard nor too soft, but just right. So she seated herself in it, and there she sat till the bottom of the chair came out, and down she came, plump upon the ground. And that made her very cross, for she was a bad-tempered little girl. Now, being determined to rest, Goldilocks went upstairs into the bedchamber, in which the three bears slept. And first she lay down upon the bed of the great big bear, but that was too high at the head for her. And next she lay down upon the bed of the middle-sized bear, and that was too high at the foot for her. And then she lay down upon the bed of the little wee bear, and that was neither too high at the head nor at the foot, but just right. So she covered herself up comfortably and lay there till she fell fast asleep. By this time, the three bears thought their porridge would be cool enough for them to eat it properly, so they came home to breakfast. Now, careless Goldilocks had left the spoon of the great big bear standing in his porridge. "Somebody has been at my porridge," said the great big bear in his great, rough, gruff voice. Then the middle-sized bear looked at his porridge and saw the spoon was standing in it too. "Somebody has been at my porridge," said the middle-sized bear in his middle-sized voice. Then the wee little bear looked at his, and there was the spoon in the porridge bowl, but the porridge was all gone. "Somebody has been at my porridge and has eaten it all up," said the little wee bear in his little wee voice. Upon this, the three bears, seeing that someone had entered their home and had eaten up the little wee bear's breakfast, began to look about them. Now, the careless Goldilocks had not put the hard cushions straight when she rose from the chair of the great big bear. "Somebody has been sitting in my chair," said the great big bear in his great, rough, gruff voice. and the careless Goldilocks had squatted down the soft cushion of the middle-sized bear. "Somebody has been sitting in my chair," said the middle-sized bear in his middle-sized voice. "Somebody has been sitting in my chair and has sate the bottom through," said the little wee bear in his little wee voice. Then the three bears thought they had better make further search, in case it was a burglar. So they went upstairs into their bedchamber. Now Goldilocks had pulled the pillow of the great big bear out of its place. "Somebody has been lying in my bed," said the great big bear in his great, rough, gruff voice. And Goldilocks had pulled the bolster of the middle-sized bear out of its place. "Somebody has been lying in my bed," said the middle-sized bear in his middle-sized voice. But when the little wee bear came to look at his bed, there was the bolster in its place, and the pillow was in its place upon the bolster. And upon the pillow, there was Goldilocks' yellow head, which was not in its place, for she had no business there. "Somebody has been lying in my bed, and here she is still," said the little wee bear in his little wee voice. Now, Goldilocks had heard in her sleep the great, rough, gruff voice of the great big bear, but she was so fast asleep that it was no more to her than the roaring of wind or the rumbling of thunder. And she had heard the middle-sized voice of the middle-sized bear, but it was only as if she had heard someone speaking in a dream. But when she heard the little wee voice of the little wee bear, it was so sharp and so shrill that it awakened her at once. Up she started, and when she saw the three bears on one side of the bed, she tumbled herself out at the other and ran to the window. Now the window was open because the bears, like good, tidy bears as they were, always opened their bedchamber window when they got up in the morning. So naughty, frightened little Goldilocks jumped, and whether she broke her neck in the fall, or ran into the wood, and was lost there, or found her way out of the wood and got whipped for being a bad girl and playing truant, no one can say that. But the three bears never saw anything more of her. "Someone has been at my porridge and has eaten it all up. Somebody has been at my porridge and has eaten it all up." Little Red Riding Hood by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a little girl whose father and mother loved her so dearly that they thought nothing too good for her. Her mother made for her the prettiest of little dresses. Her stockings were of fine yarn, and there were bright buckles on her shoes. Her mother also made for her a little cloak and hood of red cloth. And the little girl looked so pretty in them that her mother called her Little Red Riding Hood instead of Mary, as she had been christened. Little Red Riding Hood had a grandmother who was so old that sometimes she lay in bed all day and felt too weak to get up. One day, the mother called the little girl to her and said, "My child, I have put a pat of butter and some fresh eggs and a wheat cake in this basket. Take it and carry it to your grandmother. Run along quickly, and do not loiter nor stop to talk to anyone along the way, for I want you to get back before the afternoon is late." "Yes, dear mother," said the little girl, and she took the basket in her hand and set out for her grandmother's house. At first, she ran along briskly and stopped for nothing, but the fields were full of pretty flowers. "I am sure," thought Red Riding Hood, "that my grandmother would be glad to have a bunch of daisies and buttercups." She began to pick one here and another there until she had quite a handful. Presently, she heard feet padding along the path, and the old gray wolf came trotting by. "Good day, Red Riding Hood," said the wolf. "Good day," answered the child. "And where are you going this fine, bright day, with your basket on your arm?" "Oh, I am going to my grandmother's house," She is so old that sometimes she lies in bed and cannot get up. And I am taking her some butter and some fresh eggs and a wheat cake." "And where does your grandmother live?" "She lives over beyond the wood in a little white house with a thatched roof and green blinds, and the path runs straight there." The wolf had now learned all he cared to know. He bade Red Riding Hood goodbye and trotted on briskly. As soon as he came into the wood where Red Riding Hood could not see him, he began to gallop. On and on he galloped as fast as he could, for he was anxious to get to the little white house with the thatched roof and the green blinds, before Red Riding Hood did. In the depths of the wood, a woodcutter was busy at his work. He saw the old wolf go hurrying by, and he wondered what he was after. "He's up to some mischief or other, and that is sure," said the woodcutter. And he shouldered his axe and followed on after the wolf to see what he was going to do. On went Mr. Wolf, and presently he came to the edge of the forest, and there stood the little white house with the thatched roof and green blinds, and the path led straight up to the door, so the wolf knew that must be where the grandmother lived. He stopped and looked all about him, for he did not want anyone to watch him. He saw no one, however, for the wood chopper had hidden behind some rocks. Then the wolf knocked at the door. Rap, tap, tap. Nobody answered, so he knocked again. Rap, tap, tap. Still no one answered, and there was no stir within the house, though the wolf cocked his ear and listened carefully. The wolf pulled the latch string. The latch flew up, and he pushed the door open and slipped inside. He looked about, and there was nobody there, for the old grandmother had been feeling stronger that day, so she had dressed and gone out to see a neighbor. The old wolf hunted about until he found the grandmother's bedgown. Then he pulled it on over his big, hairy body. He tied on the big ruffled cap and put the grandmother's spectacles on his nose. And after that, he crawled into bed and drew the coverlet up under his chin. The woodcutter, outside, wondered what the wolf was doing in the house, but he did not hear a sound, so he sat down to watch and see what would happen next. And as he was very tired, he fell fast asleep. It was not long before Little Red Riding Hood came running along, and she was in a great hurry, for she had spent a long time gathering flowers. The woodcutter did not see her, however, for he was asleep. The little girl ran up to the door and knocked upon it. Rap, tap, tap. Then the old wolf made his voice very faint and weak like the grandmother's. "Who is there?" he asked. "It is I, grandmother, Little Red Riding Hood," answered the child. "Pull the latch string and lift the latch," said the wolf. Red Riding Hood lifted the latch and pushed the door open and went in. There was not much light in the room, for the wolf had pulled the curtains across the window. "I am not able to get up, dear child," said the wolf, still in the same weak voice. "Put your basket on the table and come over here." Red Riding Hood did as she was told. She put the basket on the table and came over to the bedside. But as she came closer, she thought her grandmother looked very strange. "Oh, grandmother, what great big eyes you have," said she. "The better to see you with, my dear," answered the wolf. "But oh, grandmother, what long, long ears you have." "The better to hear you, my dear." "But grandmother, what big, sharp, white teeth you have." "The better to eat you with," howled the wolf, and he sprang out of bed and caught Red Riding Hood by the cloak. The little girl cried out, but at this moment, the woodcutter burst open the door and rushed in. The howl had awakened him from his sleep, and just in time. he struck the wolf with such a blow on the head that it fell down dead. Then he took Red Riding Hood up in his arms and comforted her, for she was crying bitterly. She was frightened, and her pretty red cloak had been torn. He wiped her eyes and promised to walk home with her. But first, he said, they must wait until the grandmother came home. When she came at last and heard the story and saw the wolf lying there on the floor, she could not thank the woodcutter enough. And indeed, if it had not been for him, the little girl would certainly have been eaten by the wolf. But from then on, Red Riding Hood was careful to obey her mother and not loiter on the way when she was sent on errands. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, in the middle of winter, when the flakes of snow were falling like feathers from the clouds, a queen sat at her palace window, which had an ebony black frame, stitching her husband's shirts. While she was and thus engaged, and looking out at the snow, she pricked her finger, and 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow. Now the red looked so well upon the white that she thought to herself, "Oh, then I had a child as white as this snow, as red as this blood, and as black as the wood of this frame." And soon afterwards, a little daughter came to her, who was white as snow, with cheeks as red as blood, and with hair as black as ebony. And from this she was named Snow White. And at the same time, her mother died. About a year afterwards, the king married another wife, who was very beautiful, but so proud and haughty that she could not bear anyone to be better looking than herself. She owned a wonderful mirror, and when she stepped before it and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" it replied, "The queen is the fairest of the day." Then she was pleased, for she knew that the mirror spoke truly. Little Snow White, however, grew up and became prettier and prettier, and when she was 7 years old, she was as fair as the noonday, and more beautiful than the queen herself. When the queen now asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" it replied, "The queen was fairest yesterday. Snow White is the fairest now, they say." This answer so angered the queen that she became quite yellow with envy. From that hour, whenever she saw Snow White, her heart was hardened against her, and she hated the little girl. Her envy and jealousy increased, so that she had no rest day or night, and she said to a huntsman, "Take the child away into the forest. I will never look upon her again. You must kill her and bring me her heart and tongue for a token." The huntsman listened and took the maiden away, but when he drew out his knife to kill her, she began to cry, saying, "Oh, dear huntsman, give me my life. I will run into the wild forest and never come home again." This speech softened the hunter's heart, and her beauty so touched him that he had pity on her and said, "Well, run away then, poor child." But he thought to himself, "The wild beasts will soon devour you." Still, he felt as if a stone had been lifted from his heart, because her death was not by his hand. Just at that moment, a young boar came roaring along to the spot. And as soon as he clapped eyes upon it, the huntsman caught it and, killing it, took its tongue and heart, and carried them to the queen for a token of his deed. But now, poor little Snow White was left motherless and alone, and overcome with grief. She was so bewildered at the sight of so many trees, and knew not which way to turn. She ran till her feet refused to go farther, and as it was getting dark, and she saw a little house near, she entered in to rest, In this cottage, everything was very small, but very neat and elegant. In the middle stood a little table with a white cloth over it, and 7 little plates upon it, each plate having a spoon and a knife and a fork, and there were also 7 little mugs. Against the wall were 7 little beds arranged in a row, each covered with snow-white sheets. Little Snow White, being both hungry and thirsty, ate a little morsel of porridge out of each plate, and drank a drop or 2 of wine out of each mug, for she did not wish to take away the whole share of anyone. After that, because she was so tired, she laid herself down on one bed, but it did not suit. She tried another, but that one was too long. A 4th was too short, a 5th too hard. But the 7th was just the thing, and tucking herself up in it, she went to sleep, first saying her prayers as usual. When it became quite dark, the owners of the cottage came home, 7 dwarfs, who dug for gold and silver in the mountains. They first lighted 7 little lamps, and saw at once, for they lit up the whole room, that somebody had been inside, for everything was not in the order in which they had left it. "Who had been eating off my plate?" the first asked. "Who had been sitting on my chair?" the second. "Who had been eating off of my plate?" the third said. "Who has been nibbling at my bread?" the fourth. "Who has been at my porridge?" the fifth. "Who has been meddling with my fork?" the sixth grumbled out. "Who has been cutting with my knife?" the seventh said. "Who has been drinking out of my mug?" Then the first, looking around, began again. "Who has been lying on my bed?" he asked, for he saw that the sheets were tumbled. At these words the others came, and looking at their beds, cried out too, "Someone has been lying in our beds!" But the 7th little man, running up to his, saw Snow White sleeping in it. So he called his companions, who shouted with wonder and held up their 7 lamps, so that the light fell upon the little girl. "Oh, heavens! Oh, heavens!" said they. "What a beauty she is!" And they were so much delighted that they would not awaken her, but left her to sleep. And the 7th dwarf, in whose bed she was, slept with each of his fellows 1 hour, and so passed the night. As soon as morning dawned, Snow White awoke, and was quite frightened when she saw the 7 little men, but they were very friendly, and asked her what she was called. "My name is Snow White," was her reply. "Why have you come into our cottage?" they asked. Then she told them how her stepmother would have had her killed, but the huntsman had spared her life, and how she had wandered about the whole day, until at last she had found their house. When her tale was finished, the dwarf said, "Will you look after our household, be our cook, make the beds, wash, sew, and knit for us, and keep everything in neat order? If so, we will keep you here, and you shall want for nothing." And Snow White answered, "Yes, with all my heart and will." And so she remained with them, and kept their house in order. In the morning, the dwarfs went into the mountains and searched for silver and gold, and in the evening they came home and found their meals ready for them. During the day, the maiden was left alone, and therefore the good dwarfs warned her and said, "Be careful of your stepmother, who will soon know of your being here. So let nobody enter the cottage." The queen, meanwhile, supposing that she had eaten the heart and tongue of her stepdaughter, believed that she was now above all the most beautiful woman in the world. One day she stepped before her mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And it replied, "The queen was fairest yesterday. Snow White is fairest now, they say. The dwarfs protect her from thy sway, amid the forest far away." This reply surprised her, but she knew that the mirror spoke the truth. She knew, therefore, that the huntsman had deceived her, and that Snow White was still alive. So she dyed her face and clothed herself as a peddler woman, so that no one could recognize her, and in this disguise she went out over the 7 hills to the house of the 7 dwarfs. She knocked at the door of the hut and called out, "Fine goods for sale! Beautiful goods for sale!" Snow White peeped out of the window and said, "Good day, my good woman. What have you to sell?" "Fine goods, beautiful goods," she replied. "Stays of all colors." And she held up a pair which were made of many colored silks. "I may let in this honest woman," thought Snow White, and she unbolted the door and bargained for 1 pair of stays. "You can't think, my dear, how they become you," exclaimed the old woman. "Come, let me lace them up for you." Snow White suspected nothing and let her do as she wished, but the old woman laced her up so quickly and so tightly that all her breath went, and she fell down like one dead. "Now," thought the old woman to herself, hastening away, "now am I once more the most beautiful of all." At eventide, not long after she had left, the 7 dwarfs came home and were much frightened at seeing their dear little maid lying on the ground, and neither moving nor breathing, as if she were dead. They raised her up, and when they saw that she was laced too tight, they cut the stays to pieces. And presently she began to breathe again, and little by little she revived. When the dwarfs now heard what had taken place, they said, "The old peddler woman was no other than your wicked stepmother. Take more care of yourself, and let no one enter when we are not with you." Meanwhile, the queen had reached home, and, going before her mirror, she repeated her usual words. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And it replied as before, "The queen was fairest yesterday, Snow White is fairest now, they say. The dwarfs protect her from thy sway, amid the forest, far away." As soon as it had finished, all her blood rushed to her heart, for she was so angry to hear that Snow White was yet living. "But now," thought she to herself, "will I make something which shall destroy her completely." Thus saying, she made a poisoned comb by arts which she understood, and then, disguising herself, she took the form of an old widow. She went over the 7 hills to the house of the 7 dwarfs, and knocking at the door called out, "Good wares to sell today." Snow White peeped out and said, "You must go farther, for I dare not let you in." "But still you may look," said the old woman, drawing out her poison comb and holding it up. The sight of this pleased the maiden so much that she allowed herself to be persuaded and opened the door. As soon as she had bought something, the old woman said, "Now let me for once comb your hair properly." And Snow White consented. But scarcely was the comb drawn through the hair when the poison began to work, and the maiden fell down senseless. "You pattern of beauty," cried the wicked queen, "it is now all over with you." And so saying, she departed. Fortunately, evening soon came, and the 7 dwarfs returned. And as soon as they saw Snow White lying, like dead, upon the ground, they suspected the queen, and discovering the poisoned comb, they immediately drew it out. Then the maiden very soon revived and told them all that had happened. So again they warned her against the wicked stepmother, and bade her open the door to nobody. Meanwhile, the queen, on her arrival home, had again consulted her mirror, and received the same answer as twice before. This made her tremble and foam with rage and jealousy, and she swore that Snow White should die if it cost her her own life. Thereupon, she went into an inner secret chamber where no one could enter, and made an apple of the most deep and subtle poison. Outwardly, it looked nice enough, and had rosy cheeks, which would make the mouth of everyone who looked at it water. But whoever ate the smallest piece of it would surely die. As soon as the apple was ready, the queen again dyed her face, and clothed herself like a peasant's wife. And then, over the 7 mountains to the house of the 7 dwarves, she made her way. She knocked at the door, and Snow White stretched out her head and said, "I dare not let anyone enter. The 7 dwarfs have forbidden me." "That is hard on me," said the old woman, "for I must take back my apples, but there is one which I will give to you." "No," answered Snow White. "No, I dare not take it." "What? Are you afraid of it?" cried the old woman. "There, see, I will cut the apple in halves. You eat the red cheeks, and I will eat the core." The apple was so artfully made that the red cheeks alone were poisoned. Snow White very much wished for the beautiful apple, and when she saw the woman eating the core, she could no longer resist, but, stretching out her hand, took the poison part. Scarcely had she placed a piece in her mouth when she fell down dead upon the ground. Then the queen, looking at her with glittering eyes, and laughing bitterly, exclaimed, "White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony. This time the dwarfs cannot reawaken you." When she reached home and consulted her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" it answered, "The queen is the fairest of the day." Then her envious heart was at rest, as peacefully as an envious heart can rest. When the little dwarfs returned home in the evening, they found Snow White lying on the ground, and there appeared to be no life in her body. She seemed to be quite dead. They raised her up and tried to see if they could find anything poisonous. They unlaced her and even uncombed her hair, and washed her with water and with wine. But nothing availed. The dear child was really and truly dead. Then they laid her upon a bier, and all 7 placed themselves around it, and wept for 3 days without ceasing. Then they prepared to bury her, but she looked still fresh and lifelike, and even her red cheeks had not deserted her. So they said to one another, "We cannot bury her in the black ground." Then they ordered a case to be made of glass. In this, they could see the body on all sides, and the dwarfs wrote her name with golden letters upon the glass, saying that she was a king's daughter. Now they placed the glass case upon the ledge on a rock, and one of them always remained by it watching. Even the birds bewailed the loss of Snow White. First came an owl, then a raven, and last of all, a dove. For a long time, Snow White lay peacefully in her case, and changed not, but looked as if she were only asleep, for she was still white as snow, red as blood, and black-haired as ebony. By and by it happened that a king's son was traveling in the forest, and came to the dwarf's house to pass the night. He soon saw the glass case upon the rock, and the beautiful maiden lying within, and he read also the golden inscription. When he had examined it, he said to the dwarfs, "Let me have this case, and I will pay what you like for it." But the dwarfs replied, "We will not sell it for all the gold in the world." "Then give it to me," said the prince, "for I cannot live without Snow White. I will honor and protect her as long as I live." When the dwarfs saw that he was so much in earnest, they pitied him, and at last gave him the case. And the prince ordered it to be carried away on the shoulders of his attendants. Presently, it happened that they stumbled over a rut, and with the shock, the piece of poisoned apple which lay in Snow White's mouth fell out. Very soon she opened her eyes, and raising the lid of the glass case, she rose up and asked, "Where am I?" Full of joy, the prince answered, "You are safe with me." And he told to her what she had suffered, and how he would rather have her than any other for his wife. And he asked her to accompany him home to the castle of the king, his father. Snow White consented, and when they arrived there, they were married with great splendor and magnificence. Snow White's stepmother was also invited to the wedding, and when she was dressed in all her finery to go, she first stepped in front of the mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And it replied, "The queen was fairest yesterday. The prince's bride is now, they say." At these words, the queen was in a fury, and was so terribly mortified that she knew not what to do with herself. At first, she resolved not to go to the wedding, but she could not resist the wish to see the princess. So she went, but as soon as she saw the bride, she recognized Snow White, and was so terrified with rage and astonishment that she rushed out of the castle and was never heard of again. The Three Little Pigs by James Hallowell Phillips. A mother pig and her 3 little pigs lived together in a wood, very happily all through the long summertime. But towards autumn, the mother pig called her little ones to her and said, "My dear little pigs, the time has come for you to go out into the world and seek your own fortunes. You will each want to build a little house to live in, but do not build them of straw or leaves. Straws are brittle and leaves are frail. Build your houses of bricks, for then you will always have a safe place to live in. You can go in and lock the door, and nothing can harm you." Then she bade the little pigs farewell, and away they ran out into the world to make their fortunes. The first little pig had not gone far when he met a man with a load of straw. The straw looked so warm and smelled so good that the little pig quite forgot what his mother had told him. "Please, Mr. Man," said the little pig, "give me enough straw to build a house to keep me warm through the long winter." The man did not say no. He gave the little pig all the straw he wanted, and then he drove on. The little pig built himself a house of straw, and it was so warm and cozy that he was quite delighted with it. "How much better," said he, "than a house of cold, hard bricks." So he lay there snug and warm, and presently the old wolf knocked at the door. Piggy wig, let me in," he cried. "I won't, by the hair on my chinny chin chin," answered the pig. "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in." The little pig laughed aloud, for he felt very safe in his snug straw house. "Well, then huff, and then puff, and then blow my house in," he cried. Well, the old wolf did huff and puff, and he did blow the house in, for it was only made of straw, and then he ate the little pig. The second little pig, when he left the forest, ran along, and presently he met a man with a great load of leaves. "Oh, kind Mr. Man, please give me some leaves to build me a little house for the winter time," cried the piggy. The man was willing to do this. He gave the pig all the leaves he wanted, and then he went on his way. The pig built himself a house of leaves, and it was even snugger and warmer than the straw house had been. "How silly my mother was," said the pig, to tell me to build a brick house. What could be warmer and cozier and safer than this?" And he snuggled down among the leaves and was very happy. Until presently along came the great wolf, and he stopped and knocked at the door. Piggy wig, let me in," he cried. "I won't, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in." The little pig laughed when he heard that, for the walls were thick, and he felt secure. "Well, then huff, and then puff, and then blow my house in." So the wolf huffed, and he puffed, and he did blow the house in, and he ate up the little pig that was inside of it. Now the third little pig was the smallest pig of all, but he was a very wise little pig, and he meant to do exactly as his mother had told him to do. After he left the forest, he met a man driving a wagon load of straw, but he did not ask for any of it. He met the man with a load of leaves, but he did not ask for any of that. He met a man with a load of bricks, and then he stopped and begged so prettily for enough bricks to build himself a little house that the man could not refuse him. The pig took the bricks and built himself a little red house with them, and it was not an easy task either. When it was done, it was not so soft as the little straw house, and it was not so warm as the little leaf house, but it was a very safe little house. Presently, the old wolf came along and knocked at the door. Rat-tat-tat. Piggy wig, let me in," he called. "I won't, by the hair on my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in." "Well, then huff, and then puff, and then blow my house in," answered the pig. So the old wolf huffed and he puffed, and he puffed and he huffed, and he huffed and he puffed, till he almost split his sides, and he just couldn't blow the house in, and the little pig laughed to himself as he sat safe and comfortable inside there. The old wolf saw that there was nothing to be done by blowing, so he sat down and thought and thought. Then he said, "Piggy wig, I know where there is a field of fine turnips." "Where?" asked the little pig. "Open the door and I will tell you." No, the little pig could hear quite well with the door closed. "It is just up the road 3 fields away," said the wolf. "And if you would like to have some, I will come for you at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, and we will go and dig them up together." "At 6 o'clock," said the little pig. "Very well." Then the old wolf trotted off home, licking his lips, and he was well content, for he thought he would have pig for breakfast the next day. But the next morning, the little pig was up and astir by 5 o'clock. Off he trotted to the turnip field and gathered a whole bagful of turnips, and was home again before the old wolf thought of coming. At 6 o'clock, the old wolf knocked at the door. "Are you ready to go for the turnips, piggy?" he cried. "Ready," answered the pig. "Why, I was up and off to the field an hour ago, and I have all the turnips I want, and I'm boiling them for breakfast." "That's what you did," said the wolf. And then he thought a bit. "Piggy, do you like fine, ripe apples?" he asked. Yes, the pig was very fond of apples. "Then I can tell you where to find some." "Where is that?" "Over beyond the hill in the squire's orchard. And if you will play me no tricks, I will come for you at 5 o'clock tomorrow, and we will go together and gather some." Very well, the pig would be ready. So the wolf trotted off home, and this time he was very sure that he would have a nice, fat little piggy for breakfast the next morning. The little pig got up at 4 o'clock the next day, and off he started for the orchard, as fast as his 4 little feet would carry him. But the way was long, and the tree was hard to climb, and while he was still up among the branches gathering apples, the old wolf came trotting into the orchard. The little pig was very much frightened, but he kept very still and hoped, up among the leaves, the wolf would not see him. The wolf peered about, first up one tree and then up another, and finally he spied the piggy up among the branches. "Why did you not wait for me?" "Oh, I knew you would be along presently." "How soon are you coming down?" "When I have picked a few more apples." The old wolf sat down at the foot of the tree, and the pig sat up among the branches, crunching apples and smacking his lips. "Are they good?" asked the wolf, looking up, and his mouth watered. Yes, they were very good. "Could you not throw one down to me?" Yes, the little pig could do that. He picked the biggest, reddest apple he could, and then he threw it. But he threw it far off, and in such a way that it went bounding and rolling down the hill slope. The wolf bounded down the hill after it, and while he was catching it, the little pig climbed down the tree and ran safely home with his basket full of apples. When the old wolf found the pig had tricked him again, he was very angry. He was more determined than ever that he would catch the little pig. He trotted off to the little red house and knocked at the door. "Did you get all the apples you wanted?" asked the wolf. Yes, the little pig had all he wanted, and he was very much obliged to the wolf for telling him about the orchard. "Listen, piggy, there's to be a fine fair over in the town tomorrow," said the wolf. "Wouldn't you like to go?" Yes, the little pig would very much like to go. "Very well," said the wolf. "Then I will come for you at 3:30 tomorrow, and we will go together." "Very well," said the little pig. But long before 3:30 the next day, Piggy was off to the fair, and he took 4 bright silver pieces with him, for he wanted to buy himself a butter churn. It did not take him long to buy the churn, and then he started home again, carrying it on his back. But the wolf had learned a thing or two about the little pig's tricks. He, too, started off to the fair long before 3:30, and so it was that the little pig was scarcely halfway home, and had just reached the top of a high hill, when he saw the wolf come trotting up the hill directly toward him. The little pig was terrified. He looked all around, but he could not see any place to hide. He decided the best thing he could do was to get inside the churn. So he put it down and crept inside it. But the hill was very steep, and no sooner was the piggy inside the churn than it began to roll down the hill slope, bumpity-bumpity-bump, over rocks and stones, leaping and bounding like a live thing. The little pig did not know what was happening to him. He began to squeal at the top of his voice. The old wolf was halfway up the hill when he heard the noise. He looked up, and there was a great round thing coming bounding over the rocks straight at him, and squeaking as it came. He gave one look, and his hair bristled with fear, and with a howl he turned tail and ran home as fast as he could. He never stopped till he was safe inside his house and had shut and locked the door behind him. There he crouched, trembling and wondering what would happen. But nothing happened, and all was quiet. So after a while, the wolf ventured out and ran over to the pig's house. "Piggy, piggy, are you in there?" Yes, the little pig was sitting by the fire roasting apples. "Then listen while I tell you what happened to me on the way to the fair." Then the wolf put his nose close to the crack of the door and told the little pig all about the great round squealing thing that had chased him down the hill. The little pig laughed and laughed. "And I can tell you exactly what the great squealing thing was. It was a churn I had bought at the fair, and I was inside it." When the old wolf heard this, he was so furious that he determined to have the little pig, even if he had to climb up on the roof and down the chimney to get him. He stuck his sharp nails in between the bricks of the house and climbed right up the side of it and onto the roof. Then he climbed up the chimney and slid down it into the fireplace. But the little pig had heard what he was doing and was ready for him. He had a great pot of boiling water on the fire, and when he heard the wolf slipping and scrabbling down the chimney, he took the lid off the kettle, and plump, the old wolf went right into the boiling water. And plump, the old wolf went right into the boiling water. Then the little pig clapped the lid tight down over him, and that was the end of the wolf. But the little pig lived on in peace and plenty forever after, and if any wolf ever came along to bother him, I have never heard of it. Hansel and Gretel by the Brothers Grimm. Hard by a great forest dwelt a poor woodcutter with his wife and his 2 children. The boy was called Hansel and the girl Gretel. He had little to bite and to break, and once when great scarcity fell on the land, he could no longer procure daily bread. Now, when he thought over this by night in his bed, and tossed about in his anxiety, he groaned and said to his wife, "What is to become of us? How are we to feed our poor children when we no longer have anything even for ourselves?" "I'll tell you what, husband," answered the woman. "Early tomorrow morning we will take the children out into the forest to where it is the thickest. There we will light a fire for them and give each of them 1 piece of bread more. Then we will go to our work and leave them alone. They will not find the way home again, and we shall be rid of them." "No, wife," said the man. "I will not do that. How can I bear to leave my children alone in the forest? The wild animals would soon come and tear them to pieces." "Oh, you fool," said she. "Then we must all 4 die of hunger. You may as well plane the planks for our coffins." And she left him no peace until he consented. "But I feel very sorry for the poor children, all the same," said the man. The 2 children had also not been able to sleep for hunger, and had heard what the woman had said to their father. Gretel wept bitter tears and said to Hansel, "Now all is over with us." "Be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel. "Do not distress yourself. I will soon find a way to help us." And when the old folk had fallen asleep, he got up, put on his little coat, opened the door below, and crept outside. The moon shone brightly, and the white pebbles, which lay in front of the house, glittered like real silver pennies. Hansel stooped and put as many of them into the little pocket of his coat as he could possibly get in. Then he went back and said to Gretel, "Be comforted, dear little sister, and sleep in peace. God will not forsake us." And he lay down again in his bed. When day dawned, but before the sun had risen, the woman came and awoke the 2 children, saying, "Get up, you sluggards! We are going into the forest to fetch wood." She gave each a little piece of bread and said, "There is something for your dinner, but do not eat it up before then, for you will get nothing else." Gretel took the bread under her apron, as Hansel had the stones in his pocket. Then they all set out together on the way to the forest. When they had walked a short time, Hansel stood still and peeped back, and did so again and again while he was throwing the white pebble stones, one by one, out of his pocket onto the road. When they had reached the middle of the forest, the father said, "Now, children, pile up some wood, and I will light a fire that you may not get cold." Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood together, as high as a little hill. The brushwood was lighted, and when the flames were burning very high, the woman said, "Now, children, lay yourselves down by the fire and rest. We will go into the forest and cut some wood. When we are done, we will come back and fetch you away." Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and when noon came, each ate a little piece of bread. And, as they heard the strokes of the wood axe, They believed that their father was near. It was, however, not the axe. It was a branch which he had fastened to a withered tree, which the wind was blowing backward and forward. And as they had been sitting such a long time, their eyes shut with fatigue, and they fell fast asleep. When at last they awoke, it was already dark night. Gretel began to cry and said, "How are we to get out of the forest now?" But Hansel comforted her and said, "Just wait a little, until the moon has risen, and then we shall soon find the way." And when the full moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the pebbles which shone like newly coined silver pieces and showed them the way. They walked the whole night long and, by break of day, came once more to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the woman opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children! Why have you slept so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming back at all." The father, however, rejoiced, for it had cut him to the heart to leave them behind alone. Not long afterward, there was another famine in all parts, and the children heard their mother saying at night to their father, "Everything is eaten again. We have 1/2 loaf left, and after that there is an end. The children must go. We will take them farther into the wood, so that they will not be able to find their way out again. There is no other means of saving ourselves." The man's heart was heavy, and he thought, "It would be better for you to share the last mouthful with your children." The woman, however, would listen to nothing that he had to say, but scolded and reproached him. He who says A must say B, likewise, and as he had yielded the first time, he had to do so a second time also. The children were, however, still awake and had heard the conversation. When the old folk were asleep, Hansel again got up to go out and pick up pebbles. But the woman had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. Nevertheless, he comforted his little sister and said, "Do not cry, Gretel. Go to sleep quietly, and good God will help us." Early in the morning came the woman and took the children out of their beds. Their bit of bread was given to them, but it was still smaller than the time before. On the way into the forest, Hansel crumbled his in his pocket and often stood still and threw a morsel on the ground, and little by little threw all the crumbs on the path. The woman led the children still deeper into the forest, where they had never in their lives been before. Then a great fire was again made, and the mother said, "Just sit there, you children, and when you are tired, you may sleep a little. We are going into the forest to cut wood. In the evening, when we are done, we will come and fetch you away." When it was noon, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel, who had scattered his along the way. Then they fell asleep. An evening passed, but no one came to the poor children. They did not awaken until it was a dark night, and Hansel comforted his little sister and said, "Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises, and then we shall see the crumbs of bread which I have strewn. They will show us our way home again." When the moon came, they set out, but they found no crumbs. For the many thousands of birds, which fly about in the woods and fields, had picked them all up. Hansel said to Gretel, "We shall soon find the way." But they did not find it. They walked the whole night and all the next day, from morning till evening, but they did not get out of the forest, and were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but 2 or 3 berries, which grew on the ground. And as they were so weary that their legs would not carry them any longer, they lay down beneath a tree and fell asleep. It was now 3 mornings since they had left their father's house. They began to walk again, but they always got deeper into the forest. If help did not come soon, they must die of hunger and weariness. When it was midday, they saw a beautiful snow-white bird sitting on a bough, which sang so delightfully that they stood still and listened to it. And when it finished its song, it spread its wings and flew away before them. They followed it until they reached a little house, on the roof of which it alighted. When they came quite up to the little house, they saw that it was built of bread and covered with cakes, but that the windows were of clear sugar. "We will set to work on that," said Hansel, "and have a good meal. I will eat a bit of the roof, and you, Gretel, can eat some of the window. It will taste sweet." Hansel reached up and broke off a little of the roof to try how it tasted. Gretel leaned against the window and nibbled at the panes. Then a soft voice cried from the room, "Nibble, nibble, gnaw! Who nibbles at my door?" But the children went on eating without disturbing themselves. Hansel, who thought the roof tasted very nice, tore down a great piece of it. Gretel pushed out the whole of one round window pane, sat down, and enjoyed herself with it. Suddenly the door opened, and a very, very old woman, leaning on crutches, came creeping out. Hansel and Gretel were so terribly frightened that they let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said, "Oh, you dear children, who has brought you here? Do come in and stay with me. No harm shall happen to you." She took them both by the hand and led them into her little house. Then she set good food before them, milk and pancakes, with sugar, apples, and nuts. Afterward, she covered 2 pretty little beds with clean white linen, and Hansel and Gretel lay down in them, and they thought they were in heaven. The old woman had only pretended to be so kind. She was really a wicked witch who lay in wait for children, and who had built the little bread house in order to entice them there. When a child fell into her power, she killed it, cooked and ate it, and that was a feast day with her. Witches have red eyes and cannot see far, but they have a keen scent like the beasts, and are aware when human beings draw near. When Hansel and Gretel came into her neighborhood, she laughed maliciously and said mockingly, "I have them. They shall not escape me again." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was up, and when she saw both of them sleeping and looking so pretty, with their plump red cheeks, she muttered to herself, "That will be a dainty mouthful." Then she seized Hansel with her shriveled hand, carried him into a little stable, and shut him in with a grated door. He might scream as he liked, which was of no use. Then she went to Gretel, shook her till she awoke, and cried, "Get up, lazy thing! Fetch some water and cook something good for your brother. He is in the stable outside and is to be made fat. When he is fat, I will eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was all in vain, as she was forced to do what the wicked witch ordered her to do. And now the best food was cooked for poor Hansel, while Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the woman crept to the little stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out your finger that I may feel if you will soon be fat." When 4 weeks had gone by, she was seized with impatience and would not wait any longer. "Ho there, Gretel," she cried to the girl. "Be active and bring some water. Let Hansel be fat or lean. Tomorrow I will kill him and cook him." Ah, how the poor little sister did lament when she had to fetch the water, and how her tears did flow down over her cheeks. "Dear God, do help us," she cried. "If the wild beasts in the forest had but devoured us, we should at any rate have died together." "Just keep your noise to yourself," said the old woman. "All that won't help you at all." Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang up the cauldron, full of water, and light the fire. "We will bake first," said the old woman. "I have already heated the oven and kneaded the dough." She pushed poor Gretel out to the oven, from which flames of fire were darting. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it is properly heated, so that we can shut the bread in." And when once Gretel was inside, She intended to shut the oven and let her bake in it, and then eat her too. But Gretel saw what she had in her mind and would not creep in. "Silly goose," said the old woman. "The door is big enough. Just look. I can get in myself." And she crept up and thrust her head in. Then she fell over into the oven and was miserably burnt to death. Gretel, however, ran as quick as lightning to Hansel, opened his little stable, and cried, "Hansel, we are saved! The old witch is dead." Then Hansel sprang out like a bird from its cage, when the doors opened for it. How they did rejoice and embrace each other, and dance about and kiss each other. And as they had no longer any need to fear her, they went into the witch's house, and in every corner there stood chests full of pearls and jewels. "These are far better than pebbles," said Hansel, and thrust into his pockets whatever he could get in. And Gretel said, "I too will take something home with me," and she filled her pinafore full. "But now we will go away," said Hansel, "that we may get out of the witch's forest." When they had walked for 2 hours, they came to a great piece of water. "We cannot get over," said Hansel. "I see no footplank and no bridge." "And no boat crosses either," answered Gretel. "But a white duck is swimming there. If I ask her, she will help us over." And then she cried, "Little duck, dost thou see? Hansel and Gretel are waiting for thee. There's never a plank nor a bridge in sight. Take us across on thy back so white." The duck came to them, and Hansel seated himself on her back, and told his sister to sit by him. "No," replied Gretel, "that will be too heavy for the little duck. She shall take us across, one after the other." The good little duck did so, and when they were once safely across and had walked for a short time, the forest seemed to be more and more familiar to them. At length they saw from afar their father's house. Then they began to run, rushed into the parlor, and threw themselves into their father's arms. The man had not known one happy hour since he had left the children in the forest. The woman, however, was dead. Gretel emptied her pinafore until pearls and precious stones ran about the room, and Hansel threw one handful after another out of his pocket to add to them. Then all trouble was at an end, and they lived together in perfect happiness. The Frog Prince by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a king who had only one daughter, and her he loved as he loved the apple of his eye. One day the princess sat beside a fountain in the gardens and played with a golden ball. She threw it up into the air and caught it again, and the ball shone and glittered in the sunshine, so that she laughed aloud with pleasure. But presently, as she caught at the ball, she missed it, and it rolled across the grass and fell into the fountain. There it sank to the bottom. The princess tried and tried to reach it, but she could not. Then she began to weep, and her tears dripped down into the fountain.
"Princess, princess, why are you weeping?"
asked a hoarse voice. The princess looked about her, and there was a great squat green frog sitting on the edge of the fountain. "I am weeping, Froggy, because I have dropped my ball into the water, and I cannot get it again," answered the princess.
"And what will you give me if I get it for you?"
"Anything in the world, dear frog, except the ball itself."
"I wish you to give me nothing, princess," said the frog. "But if I bring back your ball to you, will you let me be your little playmate? Will you let me sit at your table and eat from your plate and drink from your mug and sleep in your little bed?"
"Yes, yes," cried the princess. She was very willing to promise, for she did not believe the frog could ever leave the fountain or come up the palace steps.
"Very well, then that is a promise," said the frog. and at once he plunged into the fountain and brought back the ball to the princess in his arms. The little girl took the ball and ran away with it, without even stopping to thank him. That evening, the child sat at supper with her father, and she ate from her golden plate and drank from her golden mug, and she did not even give a thought to the frog down in the fountain. Presently, there came a knocking at the door, but it was so soft that no one heard it but the princess. Then the knocking came again, and a hoarse voice cried, "King's daughter, let me in. Have you forgotten the promise you made me by the fountain?" The princess was frightened. She slipped down from her chair and ran to the door and opened it and looked out. There on the topmost step sat the great green frog. When the princess saw him, she shut the door quickly and came back to the table, and she was very pale. "Who was that at the door?" asked the king. "It was no one," answered the princess. "But there was surely someone there," said the king. "It was only a great green frog from the fountain," said the princess. And then she told her father how she had dropped her ball into the fountain, and how the frog had brought it back to her, and of what she had promised him. "What you have promised, that you must perform," said the king. "Open the door, my daughter, and let him in." Very unwillingly, the child went back to the door and opened it. The frog hopped into the room. When she returned to the table, the frog hopped along close at her heels. She sat down and began to eat. King's daughter, set me upon the table that I too may eat from your golden plate," said the frog. The princess would have refused, but she dared not because of what her father had said. She lifted the frog to the table, and there he ate from her plate, but she herself could touch nothing. "I am thirsty," said the frog. "Tilt your golden mug that I may drink from it." The princess did as he bade her, but as she did so, she could not stop weeping, so that her tears ran down into the milk. When supper was ended, the princess was about to hurry away to her room, but the frog called to her, King's daughter, take me along. Have you forgotten that I was to sleep in your little white bed?" "That you shall not," cried the princess in a passion. "Go back to the stones of the fountain, where you belong." "What you have said, that you must do," said the king. "Take the frog with you." The princess shuddered, but she dared not refuse. She took the frog with her up to her room and put him down in the darkest corner, where she would not see him. Then she undressed and went to bed. But scarcely had her head touched the pillow when she heard the frog calling her. King's daughter, is this the way you keep your promise? Lift me up to the bed, for the floor is cold and hard." The princess sprang from the bed and seized the frog in her hands. "Miserable frog," she cried. "You shall not torment me in this way." So saying, she threw the frog against the wall with all her force. But no sooner did the frog touch the wall than it turned into a handsome young prince, all dressed in green, with a golden crown upon his head, and a chain of emeralds about his neck. The prince came to her and took her by the hand. "Dear princess," said he, "you have broken the enchantment that held me. A cruel fairy was angry with my father, and so she changed me into a frog and put me there in the fountain. But now that the enchantment is broken, we can really be playmates. And when you are old enough, you shall be my wife." The princess did not say no. She was delighted at the thought of having such a handsome playmate. And as for marrying him later on, she was quite willing for that too. So the prince stayed there in the palace, and the king was very glad to think he was to have him for a son-in-law. And when he and the princess were married, there was great rejoicing and feasting through all the kingdom. The prince, however, was not willing to stay away from his own kingdom any longer. He said he must return to see his old father. One day, a handsome golden coach drawn by 8 white horses drove up to the door.
It had been sent by the prince's father to fetch him home again. Upon the box rode the faithful servant who had cared for the prince when he was a child. When the prince had been carried away by the fairy, this faithful servant had grieved so bitterly that he feared his heart would break. To keep this from happening, he had put 3 great iron bands around his body. The prince and the princess entered the coach, and away went the horses. They had not driven far, however, when a loud crack was heard. "What is that?" cried the princess. "Surely something has broken."
"Yes, mistress," answered the faithful servant. "It was a band that bound my heart. My joy hath broken it apart."
They drove a little farther, and then there came another crack, even louder than the first.
"Surely the coach is breaking down," cried the prince. "Nay, master," answered the faithful servant. "'Tis but my joy that rives apart, the second band that held my heart."
A little farther on there came another crack that was louder than any of them.
"Now surely something has broken," cried the prince and princess together. "'Tis the last band that held my heart, and joy has riven all apart," answered the servant.
After that they drove on quietly until they reached their own country. There the prince and princess lived in happiness to the end of their lives, and the faithful servant with them. Jack and the Beanstalk by Joseph Jacobs. Jack and his mother lived all alone in a little hut with a garden in front of it, and they had nothing else in the world but a cow named Blackie. One day, Blackie went dry. Not a drop of milk would she give. "See there now," said the mother. "If Blackie doesn't give us milk, we can't afford to keep her. You'll have to take her off to market, Jack, and sell her for what you can get." Jack was sorry that the little cow had to be sold, but he put a halter around her neck and started off with her. He had not gone far when he met a little old man with a long gray beard.
"Well, Jack," said the little old man, "where are you taking Blackie this fine morning?"
Jack was surprised that the stranger should know his name, and that of the cow too, but he answered politely, "Oh, I am taking her to market to sell her."
"There is no need for you to go as far as that," said the little old man, "for I will buy her from you for a price."
"What price would you give me?" asked Jack, for he was a sharp lad.
"Oh, I will give you a handful of beans for her," said the old man.
"No, no," Jack shook his head. "That would be a fine bargain for you, but it is not beans, but good silver money that I want for my cow."
"But wait till you see the beans," said the old man,
and he drew out a handful of them from his pocket. When Jack saw them, his eyes sparkled, for they were such beans as he had never seen before. They were of all colors, red and green and blue and purple and yellow, and they shone as though they had been polished. But still, Jack shook his head. It was silver pieces his mother wanted, not beans.
"Then I will tell you something further about these beans," said the man. "This is such a bargain as you will never strike again, for these are magic beans. If you plant them, they will grow right up to the sky in a single night, and you can climb up there and look about if you like."
When Jack heard that, he changed his mind, for he thought such beans as that were worth more than a cow. He put Blackie's halter in the old man's hand and took the beans and tied them up in his handkerchief and ran home with them. His mother was surprised to see him back from market so soon. "Well, and have you sold Blackie?" she asked. Yes, Jack had sold her. "And what price did you get for her?"
"Oh, he got a good price."
"But how much? How much? $25? Or 20? Or even 10? Oh, Jack had done better than that. He had sold her to an old man down there at the turn of the road for a whole handful of magic beans.
And then Jack hastened to untie his handkerchief and show the beans to his mother. But when the widow heard he had sold the cow for beans, she was ready to cry for anger. She did not care how pretty they were, and as to their being magic beans, she knew better than to believe that. She gave Jack such a box on his ears that his head rang with it, and she sent him up to bed without his supper, and the beans she threw out of the window. The next morning, when Jack awoke, he did not know what had happened. All of the room was dim and shady and green, and there was no sky to be seen from the window, only greenness. He slipped from bed and looked out, and then he saw that one of the magic beans had taken root in the night, and had grown and grown until it had grown right up to the sky. Jack leaned out of the window and looked up, and he could not see the top of the vine, but the beanstalk was stout enough to bear him. So he stepped out onto it and began to climb. He climbed and he climbed until he was high above the rooftop and high above the trees. He climbed till he could hardly see the garden down below, and the birds wheeled about him, and the wind swayed the beanstalk. He climbed so high that after a while he came to that sky country, and it was not blue and hollow as it looks to us down here below. It was a land of flat green meadows and trees and streams, and Jack saw a road before him that led straight across the meadows to a great tall gray castle. Jack set his feet in the road and began to walk toward the castle. He had not gone far when he met a lovely lady, and she was a fairy, though Jack did not know it. "Where are you going, Jack?" she asked. "I'm going to yonder castle and have a look at it," said Jack. "That is well," said the lady. "Only you must be careful how you poke about there, for the castle belongs to a very fierce and rich and terrible giant. And now I will tell you something. All the riches he has used to belong to your father. The giant stole them from him, so if you can fetch anything away with you, it will be a right and fair thing." Jack thanked her for what she told him, and then he went on, setting one foot before the other. After a while he came to the castle, and there was a woman sweeping the steps, and she was the giant's wife. When she saw Jack, she looked frightened. "What do you want here?" she cried. "Be off with you before my husband comes home, for if he finds you here, it will be the worse for you, I can tell you that." Yes, I know," said Jack. "But I've had no breakfast, and I'm likely to drop, I'm so hungry. Just give me a bite to stay my stomach, and I'll be off." The giant's wife did not want to do that at all, but Jack begged and coaxed, until at last she let him come into the house, and got out a bit of bread and cheese for him. Jack had hardly sat down to it when there was a great noise and stamping outside. "Oh, mercy!" cried the giant's wife, and she turned quite pale. "There's my husband coming in, and if he sees you here, he'll swallow you down in a trice, and give me a beating into the bargain." When Jack heard that, he did not like it at all. "Can you not hide me someplace?" he asked. "Here, creep into this copper pot," cried the woman, taking off the lid. She helped Jack into the pot and put the lid over him, and she had no more than done it before the giant came stumping into the room.
"Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman," he roared. "Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread."
"What nonsense," said his wife. "If anyone had come here, don't you suppose I would have seen him? A crow flew over the roof and dropped a bone down the chimney, and that is what you smell." When she said that, the giant believed her. He sat down at the table and called for breakfast. The woman set before him 3 whole roasted oxen and 2 loaves of bread, each as big as a hogshead, and the giant ate them up in a twinkling.
"Now, wife, bring me my money bags from the treasure room,"
he said. His wife went out through a great door studded with nails.
And when she came back, she brought 2 bags with her and set them on the table in front of the giant. The giant untied the strings and opened them, and they were full of clinking golden money. The giant sat there and counted the money. After it was all counted, he put it back in the bags again, and then he stretched his legs out in front of him and went to sleep and snored until the rafters shook. The giant's wife worked around for a while, and then she went into another room. Jack waited until he was sure she had gone, and then he pushed the lid of the pot aside and crept out. He crept over to the table and seized hold of the money bags and made off with them, and neither the giant nor his wife knew anything about it until Jack was safe down the beanstalk and home again. When Jack's mother saw the money bags, she was filled with wonder and joy. "Those were once your father's," said she, "but they were stolen from him, and never did I think to see them again." After that, Jack and his mother lived well. They had plenty to eat and drink, and good clothes to wear, and everything they wanted. And they were not stingy. They shared their good luck with their neighbors as well. After a while, the money was almost gone. "I'll just climb up the beanstalk again," said Jack to himself, "and see what else the giant has in his castle." He climbed and he climbed and he climbed, and after a while, he came to the giant's country, and there in front of him lay the road to the castle. Jack walked along briskly, setting one foot in front of the other, till he came to the castle door, and as he saw no one, he opened the door and stepped inside. There was the giant's wife scouring the pots and pans, and when she saw Jack, she almost dropped the skillet she was holding. "You're here again?" "Yes, here I am again," said Jack. "Then I wish you were someplace else," said the giant's wife. "When you were here before, our money bags were stolen, and I can't help thinking you had something to do with it." Oh, how can you think that?" cried Jack. "Well, be off with you anyway." The giant's wife spoke quite glumly. "I want no more strange lads around here." Yes, Jack would be off in a moment, but wouldn't she give him a bite of breakfast first? No, the giant's wife wouldn't, and that was that. But Jack was not to be turned off so easily. He talked and begged and argued, and while he was still talking, they heard the giant at the door. The giant's wife was terribly scared. "Oh, if he finds you here, won't I get a beating?" she cried. "Quick, into the pot again!" Jack crawled into the copper pot, and the giant's wife put the lid over him. The next moment, the giant stamped into the room.
"Fee, fi, fo, fum," he bawled. "I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread."
"Nonsense," said his wife. "You're always fancying things. Here, sit down at the table and eat your breakfast. A crow flew over the roof and dropped a bone in the fire, and that is what you smell." The giant sniffed about a bit, and then, still muttering to himself, he sat down at the table and began to eat. After he had finished, he cried, "Now, wife, bring me my little red hen from the treasure room." His wife went into the treasure room, and presently she came back with a little red hen in her apron. She set it on the table before the giant. The giant grinned till he showed all his teeth. "My little red hen, my pretty red hen, lay," said the giant. And as soon as he said that, the hen laid an egg, all of pure gold. "My little red hen, my pretty red hen, lay," said the giant. And then the little red hen laid another egg. "My little red hen, my pretty red hen, lay," said the giant. Then the hen laid a third egg. "There," said the giant. "That is enough for today. Now, wife,
You can take her back to the treasure room again."
His wife took up the hen and carried her off to the treasure room. But when she came back into the kitchen, she forgot to shut the treasure room door behind her. Then the giant stretched his legs out in front of him and went to sleep and snored till the rafters shook. His wife worked around in the kitchen, and after a while, when she wasn't looking, Jack crept out of the pot. He crept over to the door of the treasure room and slipped through, and there was the little red hen sitting comfortably on a golden nest. Jack caught her up under his arm, and she never made a sound. Then he crept back through the kitchen and out through the door, and made off down the road, and the giant's wife never saw him at all. But just as Jack reached the beanstalk, the hen began to cackle. This woke the giant.
"Wife! Wife!"
he roared.
"Someone is stealing my little red hen!"
And he ran out of the castle and looked all about him. But he could see no one, for Jack was already halfway down the beanstalk. After that, Jack and his mother never had any lack of anything, for whenever he wanted money, he only had to say, "My little red hen, my pretty red hen, lay." And the hen would lay a golden egg. Still, Jack was not satisfied. He wanted to see what else was in the giant's castle. So one day, without saying a word to his mother, he climbed the beanstalk and hurried along the road to the giant's castle. He did not want to meet the giant's wife, for he thought maybe she had guessed that it was he who had taken the giant's hen and the money bags. And so indeed she had. And what was more, she had told the giant all about it too. Jack crept up to the castle very carefully, and he saw no one. He opened the castle door a crack and peeped in, and still he saw no one. He pushed it open a little wider, and then he ran in and across the kitchen and hid himself in the great oven. He had no more than done this before the giant's wife came in. "Phew!" said she. "What a draught!" And she closed the outside door. Then she set the giant's breakfast on the table, still talking to herself. "The door must have blown open," said she. "I'm sure I closed it when I went out." Presently, the giant came thumping and stumping into the house. The moment he entered the room, he began to bawl.
"Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread."
"What? What?" cried his wife. "I found the door open just now. Do you suppose that dratted boy is in the house again?"
"If he is, I'll soon put an end to him,"
said the giant. The giant's wife ran to the copper pot and lifted the lid, and looked inside it, but no one was there. Then she and the giant began to hunt about. They looked in the cupboards and behind the doors, and every place, but they never thought of looking in the oven. "He can't be here after all," said the wife, "or we would have found him. It must be something else you smell." So the giant sat down and began to eat his breakfast. But as he ate, he mumbled and grumbled to himself. After he had finished, he said, "Wife, bring out my golden harp to sing for me." His wife went into the treasure room and came back carrying a golden harp. She set it on the table before the giant, and at once it began to make music, and the music was so beautiful that it melted the heart to hear it. The giant's wife sat down to listen too, and presently the music put them both to sleep. Then Jack crept out of the oven and seized the harp and made off with it. At once the harp began to call, "Master, master, help! Someone is running off with me!" The giant started out of sleep and looked about him. When he found the harp gone, he gave a roar like an angry bull. He ran to the door, and there was Jack, already more than halfway down the road.
"Stop! Stop!"
cried the giant. But Jack had no idea of stopping. He ran until he reached the beanstalk, and then he began climbing down it as fast as he could, still carrying the harp. The giant followed, and when he came to the beanstalk, he looked down, and there was Jack far, far below him. The giant was not used to climbing. He did not know whether to follow or not. Then the harp cried again, "Help, master, help!" The giant hesitated no longer. He caught hold of the beanstalk and began to climb down. By this time, Jack had reached the ground. "Quick, quick, mother!" he cried. "Bring me an axe!" His mother came running with an axe. She did not know what he wanted it for, but she knew he was in a hurry. Jack seized the axe and began to chop the beanstalk. The giant above felt the stalk tremble.
Wait a bit, he cried. I want to talk to you.
But before he could say anything more, the beanstalk was chopped through and fell with a mighty crash. And as the giant fell with it, that was the end of him. But Jack and his mother lived in peace and plenty forever after. The end.